Part 1.
I used to believe that love announced itself loudly, that it arrived with certainty, with fireworks or confessions shouted in the rain, with doors slammed open and hearts laid bare. I believed love was something you recognized immediately, like a song you already knew the lyrics to. I was wrong. Love came to me quietly, so quietly that at first I mistook it for loneliness. I was 28 when I moved to Grey Haven. The name itself sounded unfinished, like a place that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. It was a coastal town folded between cliffs and water, permanently wrapped in mist, as if the sea were trying to keep it to itself. I hadn't chosen it because I loved the ocean or needed a fresh start. I chose it because it was far enough from everything that had hurt me and small enough that no one would ask questions. My marriage had ended 6 months earlier. Ended is a generous word. It had dissolved, slowly, painfully, without drama, just two people realizing they had been holding on to a version of each other that no longer existed. There was no betrayal, no explosion, just absence. And absence, I learned, can hollow you out just as completely. Grey Haven didn't care who I was before. I rented a small apartment above a closed-down bookstore on Alder Street. The sign still hung crookedly over the door, marrow and ink. The paint chipped, the letters faded. I like to imagine what it had been like when it was alive, the smell of paper, the low hum of conversations, the quiet companionship of people reading side by side. My apartment had slanted floors and windows that rattled when the wind was strong. From the kitchen, I could see a narrow strip of ocean, gray most days, silver on the rare mornings when the sun fought through the clouds. I told myself I would stay for 1 year. Just 1 year to breathe again. I met him on a Tuesday. It was raining, not heavily, but persistently, the kind of rain that feels intentional, as though the sky has all day to wait you out. I had ducked into a café near the harbor, mostly to escape the damp creeping into my coat. The café was called Low Tide. It was warm inside, all dark wood and soft yellow light, smelling faintly of coffee and something sweet, cinnamon maybe. Only a few people were scattered across the room, laptops open, cups half finished. I chose a small table by the window and shrugged out of my coat, already rehearsing the order in my head. I hadn't noticed him until he spoke. "Take the corner table," he said. His voice was calm, unhurried. I looked up, slightly startled, and realized he was standing behind me, holding 2 mugs, steam rising lazily from them. "I'm sorry?" I asked. He nodded toward the table I had chosen. "It wobbles. That one doesn't." There was no smile, no flirtation, just a simple statement, like he was sharing the weather forecast. "Oh," I said, feeling oddly grateful. "Thanks." He set 1 mug down on the counter, kept the other, and moved to the table he'd indicated. I watched him without meaning to. He moved with an ease that suggested familiarity, with the space, with himself. He wore a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up to his forearms, revealing hands marked with faint scars, the kind that come from work rather than recklessness. When I brought my coffee to the new table, he was already seated, staring out the window. "I hope you don't mind," he said, glancing at me. "They don't mind if people share, not on slow days." I hesitated. Then I surprised myself by sitting down. "I don't mind," I said, and I realized I meant it. We didn't talk for a while. Outside, the rain traced crooked paths down the glass. Inside, the cafe hummed softly, the clink of ceramic, the low murmur of voices. I felt something I hadn't felt in months, not happiness, not excitement, but ease. Eventually, he spoke again. "You're new." It wasn't a question. "I am," I admitted. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled then, just a little. "You're looking around like you're trying to memorize the place." I laughed softly. Habit. I'm Daniel. I'm Emma. We shook hands. His grip was warm, steady. When he let go, I noticed the absence of pressure more than the touch itself. "What brings you to Greyhaven, Emma?" he asked. I considered lying. I considered deflecting. Instead, I said, "I needed somewhere quiet." He nodded, as if that answer fit perfectly. "Greyhaven is good for that," he said. "It doesn't demand much." "What does it demand at all?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Patience." I saw Daniel again the next morning, and the morning after that. It turned out he came to low tide almost every day around the same time. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. Our conversations, when they happened, were unremarkable on the surface. Books, weather, the way the tides changed the rhythm of the town. He never asked about my past, and I never asked about his. There was an unspoken agreement between us, a shared respect for silence. I learned small things instead. That he restored old boats for a living, mostly by himself. That he liked black coffee, no sugar. That he listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, he chose his words carefully, like they mattered. One morning, as we walked out together, he stopped suddenly and looked at the sky. "It's going to clear up," he said. I followed his gaze. The clouds were thick, unmoving. "How can you tell?" He pointed to the horizon, where the gray lightened just enough to suggest possibility. The wind changed. And he was right. By noon, the sun had broken through, and the ocean shimmered like it had been waiting for permission. I told myself not to read into things. I told myself this was companionship, nothing more. A shared table, a familiar face. After everything I'd lost, the idea of wanting more felt dangerous, almost irresponsible. But one afternoon, as we walked along the harbor, Daniel stopped near the edge of the dock. "Do you want to see something?" he asked. "Always," I said. He led me to a small boat moored slightly apart from the others. It was old, clearly, but lovingly cared for, the wood polished, the ropes neatly coiled. "She's not much to look at," he said, "but she floats." "That feels like a metaphor," I teased. He chuckled. "Everything floats if you fix it long enough." I stepped closer, running my fingers along the edge. "Do you ever get tired of fixing things?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said finally. "But broken things are honest. They don't pretend to be whole." I didn't know why his words landed so deeply. I only knew that suddenly the air between us felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. "I should get going," I said too quickly. He nodded, not offended. "See you tomorrow?" "Yes," I said, and the word surprised me with its certainty. That night, lying in my narrow bed, listening to the ocean breathe against the shore, I thought about him. Not in a romantic way, not yet. I thought about how safe I felt around him, how he never tried to fill the silence, how he looked at the world like it could be understood if you just paid enough attention. I realized something then, something small but important. For the first time since my marriage ended, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what might grow. And that terrified me. Greyhaven began to recognize me. That was how it felt, anyway, as if the town itself had started to nod when I passed, acknowledging my existence. The woman at the bakery no longer asked for my order. She simply handed me a paper bag still warm from the oven. The man who sold newspapers by the pier started saving one for me on days when the headlines were especially dull. And Daniel became a constant. Not in a way that felt overwhelming. He didn't appear everywhere I went, didn't insert himself into my life. He simply was there, like a shoreline you stop noticing only because it never moves. We developed a rhythm without naming it. Mornings at low tide, occasional walks along the harbor, a shared look when the rain returned, as it often did, uninvited and unapologetic. There was comfort in the predictability, But beneath it, something else stirred, something I tried very hard not to examine too closely. I was afraid that if I did, it would vanish. One morning, I arrived at the cafe later than usual. Work had kept me up the night before, freelance editing that blurred into dawn, and by the time I pushed open the door to low tide, the place was more crowded than I was used to seeing it. I scanned the room instinctively. Daniel wasn't there. The disappointment hit me harder than I expected. I ordered my coffee and took a seat alone, telling myself that this was normal. He had a life. He didn't owe me his presence. Still, I found myself glancing at the door every time it opened. He never came. That afternoon, the sky darkened early, clouds pressing low over the town. The wind picked up sharper than usual, carrying the smell of salt and something metallic. By evening, the rain had turned aggressive, slamming against my windows like it was trying to be let in. I made soup and ate it standing in the kitchen, the loneliness creeping back in around the edges. When there was a knock at my door, I startled so badly I nearly dropped the spoon. No one knocked on my door. I opened it to find Daniel standing in the narrow hallway, damp from the rain, hair darker than usual, eyes searching my face like he was making sure I was real. "I'm sorry, I should have called," he said. "I don't have your number," I said stupidly. He exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "That would explain it." "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. "My boat broke free this morning. Storm did more damage than I expected. Are you okay?" "Yes. The boat, less so." I stepped aside without thinking. "Come in." He stood awkwardly in my small living room, dripping on the worn rug like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. "Tea?" I offered. "That would be good." We sat at the tiny kitchen table, steam curling between us. He wrapped his hands around the mug, as if grounding himself. "I'm sorry I didn't come to the cafe," he said quietly. "I know I usually—" "You don't have to explain," I interrupted gently. He looked at me then, really looked, and something unreadable passed through his expression. "I like routines," he said quietly, "but I don't like feeling trapped by them." "I understand," I said, and I did. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt careful, like we were both aware that we'd crossed an invisible line simply by being here, together, in my private space. "You didn't know I lived above the bookstore," he said, glancing around. "It closed years ago. I like to pretend it might open again someday." He smiled faintly. "You collect possibilities." "I suppose I do." The storm worsened as the night deepened. The wind howled through the cracks in the building, and thunder rolled over the ocean, low and distant. At some point, the lights flickered and went completely out. "Oh," I said. "That's new." Daniel stood. "Do you have candles?" "Somewhere." We found them in a drawer I rarely opened. He lit them carefully, shielding the flame with his hands, his face briefly illuminated in gold. The shadows softened him, made him look more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. "This place feels like it's floating," he said, looking around. "Everything floats if you fix it long enough," I quoted. He laughed, surprised. "You remembered." "I remember things," I said. He met my gaze, and the laughter faded. "So do I." We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, the candlelight flickering softly. The storm outside created a cocoon around us, isolating us from the rest of the world. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "Why did you really come to Greyhaven?" The question was gentle, but it landed with weight. I could have deflected. I could have given him the same vague answer as before. Instead, something in his tone, in the way he waited, patiently, made honesty feel possible. "My marriage ended," I said. "Not badly, just completely." He nodded, not interrupting. "I realized one day that I was lonelier with him than I was alone. That felt like a failure I didn't know how to fix." "You didn't fail," he said immediately. I looked at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. "Sometimes things just reach their natural end," he said. "It doesn't mean they were pointless." I swallowed. "Why do you live here?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because I broke something I couldn't repair," he said finally. I didn't ask what. I didn't need to. The power came back an hour later, abruptly, the overhead light too bright after the intimacy of candlelight. We blinked, suddenly aware of time passing. "I should go," Daniel said, standing. The thought of him leaving created an ache in my chest that I didn't try to hide. "Be careful," I said. He hesitated near the door. "Emma," my name heavy on his tongue. "I'm not very good at this." "At what?" "At letting people get close." "I'm not asking you to," I said softly. His eyes searched mine, as if looking for a promise I hadn't made. "Good," he said, "because I don't know what I'd do if I lost it." "Lost what?" "This," he gestured between us, vaguely. "Whatever it is." I nodded. "Neither do I." And somehow that was enough. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to his footsteps fade down the stairs. I pressed my forehead against the door and let myself breathe. That night, I didn't dream about my past. I dreamt about water, about standing at the edge of something vast and waiting, knowing that stepping in would change everything. After the storm, Greyhaven felt altered. Not dramatically. The buildings were still standing, the harbor still crowded with boats rocking patiently in their moorings. But something subtle had shifted, like the town had exhaled and settled into a new shape. Or maybe it was just me. Daniel didn't come to low tide the next morning. I'd told myself not to notice. I worked instead. I cleaned the apartment, reorganized shelves that didn't need reorganizing, answered emails with forced enthusiasm. I kept myself busy enough that I almost succeeded in pretending I wasn't waiting. Almost. By the third day, the absence had grown loud. I ran into him unexpectedly that afternoon near the boatyard. I was walking without a destination, letting the sound of gulls and the smell of salt guide me, when I saw him bent over the hull of a boat, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with oil and varnish. He looked up when he sensed me, not startled, just aware, like he'd known I was there before I did. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I answered, relieved and annoyed with myself for feeling both. "You disappeared," I added before I could stop myself. His mouth tightened slightly. "So did you." "I was at the café every morning." He wiped his hands on a rag, buying time. "I needed space." The word landed heavier than it should have. "I didn't mean," he began, then stopped. Things get complicated when I don't keep them in check." "And I'm a complication?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He met my eyes, and the honesty there made my chest ache. "You're not just that," he said. He walked me home that evening. The sky was pale, washed clean by the storm, and the ocean was calm in a way that felt temporary, like it was resting between moods. We didn't talk much. The silence between us had changed. It was no longer simply comfortable. It was aware of itself. At my door, I hesitated. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's probably not a good idea." I nodded, pretending that didn't sting. "Right, of course." He paused, then reached out, stopping just short of touching my arm. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying not yet." I searched his face for doubt, for retreat, and didn't find it. "Okay," I said quietly. That night, I dreamed of my ex-husband for the first time in months. Not of our arguments or the slow decay of our marriage, but of the early days. The way he used to hold my hand in public, proud and certain, like the future was something we owned. I woke with a hollow feeling in my chest and Daniel's name on my lips. That was when I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't afraid of wanting him. I was afraid of losing him.
A week later, I saw her. She stood with Daniel near the docks, her hair pulled back, her hand resting casually on his arm like it had earned the right. She laughed at something he said, and he smiled. A real one, unguarded, the kind I hadn't seen yet. I stopped walking. They didn't notice me at first. I watched from a distance, a quiet observer to something I had no claim over. You don't know anything, I told myself. You assumed. Still, my chest tightened, jealousy blooming sharp and unwelcome. When Daniel finally looked up and saw me, surprise flickered across his face. "Emma," he said, stepping back slightly, "I didn't see you." "Clearly," I said, immediately hating the edge in my voice. "This is Claire," he said. "She's a friend," she finished smoothly, extending her hand. "It's nice to finally meet you." "Finally?" I shook her hand, her grip confident. "You too." She excused herself a moment later, leaving us standing in the awkward space she'd created simply by existing. "You didn't tell me about her," I said. "You didn't ask," he replied gently. I crossed my arms. "Is she someone I should be worried about?" The question escaped before I could reconsider it. Daniel studied me, something thoughtful and intense in his gaze. "Are you worried?" he asked. I swallowed. "I don't know what I am." He nodded slowly. "That makes two of us." We didn't see each other for several days after that. This time, the distance felt intentional. I replayed the moment over and over, analyzing every word, every look. I told myself I had no right to feel betrayed. We weren't together, not really. Whatever together even meant for two people who had never touched. And yet, something fragile had cracked. On the 5th day, he came to my apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, tension radiating off him like heat. "I don't want to do this wrong," he said without preamble. "Then don't," I replied. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the familiar space suddenly charged. "Claire is my sister," he said. I blinked. "Oh." "She comes by occasionally, checks in on me when she thinks I'm shutting the world out." My cheeks burned. "I'm sorry, I assumed." "It's okay," he interrupted. "I should have told you." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with everything we hadn't said. "I'm scared," I admitted suddenly. He looked at me, surprised by the confession. "Of what?" I said. "Of this, of how much it already matters." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "Me too." He didn't leave that night. We didn't touch, not really, but we sat close on the couch, knees brushing, shoulders nearly aligned. The proximity was electric, every accidental contact sending awareness spiraling through me. "Tell me something true," he said quietly. I thought for a moment. "I don't know how to be careful with my heart anymore." He nodded. "I never learned how." Our eyes met, and something shifted, irrevocably. When he leaned in, it wasn't sudden, it was deliberate, slow enough that I could have stopped him. I didn't. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than an answer. His hand hovered near my waist, not quite touching, like he was waiting for permission. I closed the distance. The moment deepened, heat blooming where restraint had been. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing harder than before. "This changes things," I whispered. "Yes," he agreed, "it does." After he left, before dawn, careful and quiet, I sat alone on the couch, heart racing, mind spinning. Nothing had been promised. Nothing had been defined. And yet, I knew with aching clarity there was no going back to silence.
To be continued.